When you picture slavery in ancient Egypt, do you imagine endless lines of workers dragging stones for pyramids? Archaeologists now think the Great Pyramid builders were largely paid seasonal laborers and conscripts, not chattel slaves. Evidence from workers' cemeteries and village remains suggests they received food rations and lived in organized communities. That iconic image misses the reality faced by those actually enslaved. Some were driven into fields or brick molds, but others cooked in elite kitchens, styled wigs, played music, or, if their masters required, were trained for literate tasks like record keeping. Tomb paintings, papyrus contracts, and funerary figurines help us glimpse this wider daily world. But before we explore their routines, we need to understand how a person became enslaved in the first place. Chapter 1. From Captives to Laborers. What were the actual routes that pulled someone into bondage in Egypt? The answer was not just one pathway, but several, each shaped by circumstance. Some were swept up as war captives, others pledged themselves or their families to creditors, and still others were pulled in under state-mandated labor drafts. The outcomes looked similar: lost autonomy, grueling work, but the journeys there were very different. So what happened to those taken in battle? Military campaigns against Nubia, Libya, and the Levant produced long columns of captives paraded before temples. Reliefs show them bound with arms fastened painfully behind their backs, their clothing and hairstyles marking foreign identity. They were called living prisoners, both proof of Pharaoh's power and a source of cheap labor. From there, many were made to serve in fields, households, or building projects. In a famous example, scenes in the tomb of the Vizier Rekhmir show foreign captives making bricks under strict supervisors, a vivid reminder that prisoners of war often went straight from the battlefield to heavy labor gangs. But is capture the only way one could fall into servitude? Not at all. Debt was another path, and it could be just as devastating. Imagine a farmer whose harvest failed. He owed grain and taxes, rent for land, and offerings to temples. When payments fell short, creditors might not only seize crops but people. Surviving papyri record cases where men pledged their children or wives as collateral, binding them to years of service until debts were satisfied. This debt bondage was not always permanent, but it could stretch across critical years of a family's life. A household member might spend a decade in forced service, shaping mud bricks or weaving in a workshop before freedom was regained, if it was regained at all. And what about those who were not war captives or debtors? Here the state itself stepped in. Egypt relied heavily on corvée labor, a system of compulsory drafts that functioned almost like a tax. Citizens were summoned to dig canals, harvest crops, or contribute to temple and palace building. Unlike captives, they were not considered property, and many did eventually return home. But during the term of service, the work was backbreaking. Corvée labor was technically distinct from chattel slavery, yet in practice, conscripts, debt bondsmen, and foreign captives often shouldered the same crushing loads side by side. A fragmentary papyrus even describes workers trying to flee after beatings, giving us a rare glimpse into the physical pressures that held them in place. So how tidy were these categories in reality? The short answer: they blurred constantly. A war captive might later be sold into a household. A debtor conscripted on a royal project could vanish into permanent servitude if obligations were not cleared. Conversely, some routes out existed. Records suggest a woman might secure her freedom through marriage, others via association with temples, and in some cases, manumission was granted outright. The system was fluid, long-term, sometimes effectively permanent, yet not without cracks that occasionally allowed mobility. The scale of labor drawn into such systems is clear in Egypt's eastern delta. Archaeology and texts point to large state building programs, later remembered as Pitom and Ramesses, that required massive human input. These fortress store cities were stocked with grain and goods for the crown, but behind them stood vast workforces of conscripted Egyptians, debt-bound families, and captive foreigners. The day-to-day reality was monotonous and exhausting. Brick after brick beneath the eyes of overseers, the crack of sticks ensuring pace. If we rely only on official reliefs, the spectacle celebrates Pharaoh's power, but between the lines, we glimpse the sweat and struggle that fueled it. Taken together, these examples show that slavery in Egypt was not one fixed institution, but a spectrum shaped by conquest, poverty, or state demand. A captured foreigner, a struggling farmer, and a drafted villager could all end up bent over the same mud brick molds. Yet, their experiences were conditioned by origin, contract, and circumstance. Which raises another question. While some toiled in gangs and public works, what roles awaited those absorbed into the more private world of Egyptian households? Chapter 2. Inside Pharaoh's households. Inside the estates of Egypt's elite, another side of bondage appears, less visible than the quarry gangs, but just as integral to daily life. Evidence from tomb paintings and papyri shows that enslaved men and women often served inside kitchens, weaving rooms and private chambers. They prepared food, brewed beer, wove linen, styled wigs, and even nursed children. These roles required trust and skill, challenging the idea that servitude in Egypt meant only back-breaking fieldwork under the sun. The kitchens of great households functioned almost like workshops. Enslaved cooks managed clay ovens, ground flour, kneaded dough, and prepared stews for dozens of mouths. Beer was brewed in large vats, and oil pressed for storage. Weaving rooms filled with looms produced fine linen, while other attendants tended gardens or managed flocks tied to the estate's economy. Hairdressers worked with perfumes and bronze tools to fashion wigs and elaborate styles for their mistresses. Musicians, harpists, flutists, and sistrum players provided entertainment during banquets. Nurses sometimes raised children in close proximity to the family, an intimate role that placed them at the heart of domestic life, while still remaining unfree. Occasionally, literacy created different possibilities. While widespread training of enslaved people as scribes is not firmly documented, there are hints that some bonded or dependent workers were taught to read and write for specific tasks. In those cases, they may have recorded accounts, kept household inventories, or assisted with correspondence. Scholars debate how common this was, but examples suggest that trusted individuals could gain clerical responsibilities. This remained a form of servitude, yet status shifted when a worker possessed skills that not everyone commanded. Archaeological evidence anchors these impressions. Tomb paintings often show rows of workers grinding grain, baking bread, or brewing beer. Small clay and wooden figurines capture the same activities. Kneeling bakers, women pouring water, men with harps, tiny windows into ongoing routines. In the tomb of Rekhmir, a high official of the 18th dynasty, scenes depict domestic workers engaged in food preparation and other specialized duties. Beyond their earthly role, miniature Shabti figurines buried in tombs suggest labor followed masters into eternity. These figures symbolized service in the afterlife, reinforcing the belief that households would need attendants forever. The contrast between settings makes the hierarchy vivid. Stone quarry gangs endured relentless hardship under overseers' lashes, hauling blocks in the sun. Meanwhile, those integrated into households could work indoors, supervised, but sometimes with access to training or privileges. Late New Kingdom and later records even indicate that some enslaved individuals managed to own goods, livestock, clothing, tools, perhaps even small plots of land, and exercised limited legal rights. This does not erase their bonded status, but it reveals how skill and circumstance shaped very different experiences within the same system. This produces a difficult puzzle. How could someone legally unfree also manage property, keep accounts, or wield authority over other laborers? The flexibility lay in Egyptian social structures. Ability and reliability could alter treatment, expanding the boundaries of what bondage looked like. A skilled cook, a trained hairdresser, or a literate clerk might secure privileges unseen by those in quarries, even though both remained dependent on masters. Taken together, the evidence shows that slavery in Egypt was not one uniform condition. Shabtis, tomb reliefs, contracts, and figurines demonstrate a society where forced labor spanned from the harshest gang work to skilled estate service. The same society that organized corvée crews to drag stone also relied on household attendants trusted with food, children, or accounts. Bondage was not a single shape, but a spectrum, one that defined ancient Egyptian life in ways more layered than the old image of chains and fields suggests. And when we step back, this spectrum reveals that everyday life under Pharaoh was shaped by skill and adaptation just as much as it did by hardship and grueling labor. This is it for this one. I appreciate you spending the time with me. If it added something to your day, please like, subscribe, and share this video if you can. It really helps. See you in the next one.